Welcome. Thanks for joining me today for an asana a day. And today we're going to work with Vrikshasana, the tree pose. So there are three things that I want to kind of play with and explore in this little short series. One is balance. We often have trouble balancing on one leg, essential for this pose. The other one is the flexibility of the thighs in terms of bending the knee and placing the foot. And then the other one is actually in the placing of the foot, getting it to stick and not slide. So we're going to play with a few things to kind of work on those, and you can add that into your practice today or this week. You will need a chair. We're going to do one thing with a chair, and a block could be helpful, although not essential, not necessary. And you really don't even need a sticky mat. You just do this in the middle of your kitchen or your living room or your office, wherever you happen to be. So we're going to start with balancing. So I am going to use a block. I've done this in a number of my other videos. And as I said, you don't have to have a block to do this. But if you haven't done this before, it's a good idea. You can even just take a book, like a hardback book. And we're going to look at how to do mountain pose, Tadasana, on one leg. And that's to develop that sense of strength and steadiness and stability. So placing one foot on your book or your block, or you can even do this just right on the floor. And from your hip, push downward. So imagine that your hip is pushing downward into your heel, which if you're on something like a block or a book, you rise up. And if balance is challenging, you can kind of keep those toes down. You could be near a chair or a wall or a counter to kind of help you with your balance. But just exploring, pressing from this hip down into your heel, into the earth, and beginning to feel this other leg being free. So that's a practice in itself, just working with getting, being able to stand on that one leg and have the other foot off the floor. So let's try the other side. So if you have your block, if your toes hang over the edge, that's not a problem. You need your heel on the block or the book. Or as I said, if you do this on the floor, from your hip, you're pushing down into your heel. And if you're on something, you'll rise up, obviously. If you're just on the floor, you're just pushing from your hip into your heel, into the earth, and growing taller. So just explore that a little bit. All right, the more you practice that, just check in every day, you will find this really starts to become steady. You're developing those hip muscles that bring in the stability. Okay, we're going to go one more time on each side. Push through from the hip through to the heel into the earth, and then just see if you can move this leg around behind you, out to the side, without tipping your body, right? So we're in the mountain pose, and we're just exploring, can we be steady and stable on that one leg as we move the free leg around. Let's try the other side. From your hip, push into your heel, press the block down, press into the earth, grow tall. Right? Keep this hip. We want to keep that head of that femur bone, the thigh bone, in the socket firmly and not have the hip kind of sliding down and around, which would look like this, right? So it's that hip sliding down around the femur bone. And so that image of my hip is pushing into the heel is what's really keeping that joint very congruent and stable. And you can start moving this other leg around and just playing with that a bit. Good, and then we'll come down. I'm going to move the block aside. We're going to look at the quads. So tight quads are going to make it difficult to bend your knee very deeply. So here, if balance is an issue, you can come to a counter, you can use the chair back, and we're going to stand in Tadasana and use what we just did on the block, balancing on one leg. So I'm going to press from my hip into my heel, into the earth, so I can lift this leg up and take my shin or my ankle and bring the foot back. So if you need a strap around your foot, please take a belt if this is too deep of a flexion for your knee. And we're working toward, you may find in the beginning that this knee is forward. We're working toward drawing that bent knee in line with the standing knee to really let these quads lengthen and let the hip open. Bringing your foot closer to your hip is what's really going to stretch your quads. And then we'll let go and try the other side. I'm just showing it from the side so that you can see that alignment. So if you're here, that's okay. Your bent knee is way ahead of your standing knee, with the understanding that you eventually are working toward bringing the two knees in line with each other, the two thighs in line with each other, and that foot is going to begin coming in toward your hip to really stretch those quads. To the quadriceps, I'm making an assumption you know what that is. That's the front of the thigh. That's front of the thigh muscles. If they're tight, will inhibit how much you can bend your knee. All right, now we're going to use a chair. So you can take a chair, and you could start facing the chair if that feels easier to you. I'm going to show you what we're going to do, and then you can figure out how you want to get there. I'm going to stand on one leg, applying the first little exercise we did, and then I'm turning my foot out, or my thigh out, to place my foot on the chair. So if it felt better to you and you needed the balance stability, stand next to a countertop, put your foot here, and then from this foot, turn away from that front leg. What I want is this external rotation in my hip and abduction, taking my leg away from the midline. And I'm just going to place this hand here to kind of remind this leg that I'm wanting this to open up. This is another aspect of Vrikshasana, is getting these adductors, these inner thigh muscles to lengthen. So as I just stabilize this, I'm keeping my torso in this orientation like Tadasana to let that open. And I'm still standing firmly and strongly in my one standing leg. Good. And if you'd like, you could take this arm up, or you can take it out to the side. Just take a breath. And then we're going to bend a little bit in the hip. So I'm letting my pelvis roll over the head of the femur and just kind of extend out my torso out over this bent leg. And I'm using my arm still to make this knee move back as opposed to letting it draw in, which if these muscles are tight, it's going to want to pull that leg in. So I'm just inviting that knee to move in the direction of the little toe as I turn my torso away, and I'm letting these adductors gently lengthen open. Can hang out here and breathe for a moment. You may recognize this as a variation of Vrksāsana, a standing pose that we do with both feet on the floor. That pose can contribute to Vrikshasana being a little more accessible. But we're just doing this little seed. This is a seed of that pose. Good, and then we'll come up. And now you're faced with the challenge of getting this foot off the chair. And I invite you to do that very mindfully. Stand firmly in your standing leg as you take that leg up and off the chair and down. Just so, doing that slowly, and that challenges your strength and your balance. All right, I'm going to go to the other side just so that I'm still facing you. Pressing down through my standing foot from my hip into my heel to bring this leg up, turning out and placing it on the chair, and then just taking my hand on the inner thigh, the inner knee, to remind this knee that I want it moving kind of back behind me. And I'm not getting lazy. because I have my foot on this chair and I'm not going to just kind of slouch into this hip. From this hip, I'm pushing into the floor. I'm standing tall. I'm still in this one-legged mountain pose. And inviting this inner thigh to just lengthen out. Take a breath here. And then after a moment or two, you can bend in that hip socket. Extend your torso out over that bent leg, still keeping that knee moving back behind you rather than letting it kind of pull forward. And you may feel this just slightly differently in the adductors. Just breathe. And just know that these little seed poses, if you find these challenging, these are things that you can pop in throughout the day. Maybe having a conversation with somebody in your family, just put your foot up on a chair and hang out like this while you're talking. Just kind of getting these things into your daily movement throughout the day. It's going to really start to open up. So then I'm going to come back up, firmly standing into that standing leg so I can take this foot off the chair and bring it back down. And just stand in Tadasana for a moment and notice how your legs feel, what your connection to the earth is like, how your hips feel. Good. And another aspect, besides the physical sensation, is the mind. And these balancing poses really help to draw your attention inward. So people who tend to be a little like scattered and spacey and agitated, this can pull you in to the center and calm and steady your mind. So those can be great poses for you to practice. All right, I'm moving the chair aside because we're going to do some play here. We're going to use that standing strong leg, firmly rooted and planted, and we're going to pretend to walk. So my free leg is just moving back and forth and letting my arms move just as if I was taking a big, long stride, taking a walk. And if this is challenging for you, you can do this near a counter, near a chair. Try not to rely on the chair so much, but just kind of touching to, help bring yourself into balance as you explore standing on one leg while you move the other. So you go ahead and switch sides. I already switched my side as I was demonstrating that. We're going to do this a couple of times. Good. And then let's go back to the first side. And I'm taking kind of steps, so feel free on your own to kind of add this in later on when you feel stronger in this standing leg. You may just be practicing standing on your block and moving your leg very linearly to practice that balance. We're going to go back to our first side with our pretend walking, and now I'm going to start letting my knee bend. This might be more like I'm running. And then I'm even going to do this little external rotation. Let your arms do whatever. This is playful. This is exploring and playful. Good. All right, let's switch sides. Transition that weight. Press through the heel. Find your other leg lifting. You're standing very tall. And you're letting this playful walking become sort of exaggerated and big. Let that foot, as it comes out in front, externally rotate. I am just stopping so you can see what I'm doing, but you just let it flow. Notice how I'm really moving my arms with this. Good. All right, and then we'll come back to Tadasana. Take one moment in your mountain pose. Feet parallel, hip width apart. And notice how that feels. I got a little bit of blood flowing. That feels great. Okay, now we're taking our play another level. we're going to explore what it's like to be off balance or to fall. So I'm going to choose one leg to be my standing leg, and I'm going to just explore, because this happens a lot. You go into the pose and you're like, whoops, and you fall. And so we're going to fall in different directions and come back to center. And it's great if you actually kind of overdo it and you really lose your balance for a moment. But you're trying to go off balance, off center, and then come back, find that center. Notice that I'm using my arms, and do some weird things. Go across the midline. And the more that you sort of intentionally practice this, if this happens, and I'm talking about daily life, not just in your yoga practice, you're going to be able to be like, oh yeah. I mean, your nervous system will just be like, boing. Isn't that what your nervous system says? Boing. Good. Let's go to the other side. So this is my strong, firm, rooted into the earth leg. So my other leg is free. And then we're falling off center. Coming back to center. So you sort of, and you may find like you overdo it and you don't come back to center, and then whoop, right? That's good. That's good practice when it's not quite so controlled. But the immediate early play of I'm off center and I'm back into the center, and I'm off center and I'm back. It's good nervous system training. Now, if you did this with a group of kids, or just find a couple of kids, go out, find some kids, and do this, if you could get them to do this, you would really bring that sense of playfulness in. It's good to hang out with kids. You learn so much from them about how to be playful, if we've forgotten. Okay, let's come back to Tadasana, see what that feels like. All right, so now the pose, Vrikshasana. We have this issue, this happens all the time in class. We place the foot, and then everybody says, oh, my yoga pants are too slippery. And I know it feels that way. The advanced practice is going and getting out those 1980s slippery aerobics outfits and being able to do this pose without the foot slipping. It's really about what's going on with these adductors and this femur bone. So if you really practice that standing on one leg with the block, and there's that quality of this foot pressing into the earth from the hip all the way down, and the muscles around the femur bone hug the femur bone. They become really dynamic. And it becomes a floor for this foot. So this foot is now standing in Tadasana on the floor of the inner thigh. So my heel is really rooting into the inner thigh. Now, I know not everybody can get their foot this high, which was some of the work that we did. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. And if your foot is lower, what I'm talking about right now might not be as applicable, but I want you to be aware of this, that my toes are pointing straight down at the floor, and my heel is standing on my inner thigh. So if you press your hands together like this, really push the hands together, that's what the inner thigh here is doing for this foot that's pushing back. So let's, I'm just going to do the other side, and then I'm going to walk through a couple of options for you. So you can see I'm standing on one leg. I take my shin, bringing that foot as high up as I can into the inner groin and pressing the foot in. So the toes are pointing straight down, so it's not this, with the toes pointing forward. And my inner thigh shows up for the sole of my foot. They're equal partners pressing into each other. And there's this feeling when you get that connection of your pelvis is just kind of you're lifting right up out of your pelvis. It's almost like my pelvis is lifting right up off the tops of my femur bones. Good. So here are some options. If the knee does not bend that deeply, and you could get the curve, I like that, see that? You can get the curve of your arch around your knee, right? Don't push in really hard here, right? Like you did up here. We don't want to push into that knee joint. But you can rest the curve of your arch around the knee joint. Okay, so that's one option. So this leg externally rotates and the arch rests around the knee joint. And another option that I really like, this is great for people who are really working on their balance, don't quite feel completely confident yet to be in the center of the room. Kitchen countertop, dining room table, chair, standing on one leg, and then bring your other leg up, externally rotate it. You gotta place your block in the right place. And then I'm bending my toes. Suppose you could rest on the tips of your toes. And turning this foot out, this knee out. So I have this external rotation, but this foot isn't actually touching this leg. And my standing leg, that's what I'm really working on here, is being in that standing leg. And then you could do all kinds of things with your arms. A big Y, palms spread out, facing in the midline. Maybe the arms will go straight overhead. Maybe we'll do Anjali Mudra. So let's try that on the other side. So if you put the block right around like your arch or your ankle, that's good. Press into that standing foot, bringing that leg up, turning it externally, like turning the knee out, like the thing we practice when we put our foot up on the chair. And then you can either kind of touch some surfaces to stay balanced, but really work on this is the leg that's supporting you. Or try some different arm positions. Good. And another option is, we'll go back to the other side because I'm just doing this on a few sides, and hopefully you're playing. You don't have to do exactly what I'm doing, but playing around. Tips of the toes, just like my big toe and maybe the second toe touching the floor. Externally rotating in this, my left hip as I stand on my right leg, and resting my heel against my inner shin, right? My inner lower leg. And then we'll switch sides very mindfully. Transition your weight. Strong standing leg. Bring the other foot up. Tip of the toe touching the floor, externally rotate the leg, Vrikshasana. Grow right up through the crown of your head. This is a one-legged Tadasana, just doing something different with this other leg. And then one last time, I'm going to just for me, show the full expression of this pose in this moment. So I'm standing on my right leg, very firm, very tall, as I bring the other leg up as high as I can along the thigh, pressing into the thigh. The thigh is waking up and pressing back. And then I'm going to take the arms up. Do the other side. Pressing the foot into the thigh is pressing back, and the action of this leg being a strong, stable, standing leg, and really kind of keeping this hip socket congruent, which I mean by that, the socket in the femur bone, it would be this way on this leg. The hip is not, I'm not standing with my femur bone popped out and my hip rolling down. I'm keeping that joint very well connected. And then you might lose your balance. And then that really makes this inner thigh wake up and move in toward the midline to be there for the leg that's in the air, or resting on it. And you could have, not doing this intentionally, but the wind could be blowing and your tree is resilient and responsive. So that's Vrikshasana. Thanks for joining me today for an asana a day. Hope you have a good week enjoying your tree. Go outside and try this with the trees. Namaste.